Hello and welcome into the KE Report. I'm your host, Shad Markwitz, and today we're getting an update from Fabi Lara, founder and publisher of The Next Big Rush. And we'll put a link to The Next Big Rush so you can follow along with both the website that Fabi runs, but also her YouTube page where she puts out a lot of interesting interviews with companies and thought leaders in the sector. And Fabi, we always get together for these calls about once every month or two, and it seems like the fundamentals for nuclear power just keep stacking in our favor. I don't know how long this can continue, but it seems like every time we get together, there is more news. Last time we were talking about the big wave of big tech companies looking at either restarting reactors or small modular reactors. And this time we have some of the larger reactor builds on the move as some big announcements came out of China this week. Maybe walk us through what you're looking at on the fundamental side for nuclear power.
Yeah, Shad, thanks so much for having me. I'm going to have to call myself the uranium cheerleader or something because I come here and I tell, the story and it always sounds better and better. And people might get a little bit frustrated if their tiny little junior isn't moving just yet. But this is the story. It is getting better fundamentally. And I think that the price is working its way down the chain as it's supposed to. And so, if you just as an interjection there, before we get into the big China story that came out today, along with a meta story, Facebook, is to understand that there is a right time for everything. And unfortunately, the tiny little juniors don't come before, the chemicals of this world. So let's get into the China story. So China has allegedly approved 11 nuclear reactors this year alone. 11 new nuclear reactors that were not on pretty much anybody's forecast. And there are industry insiders saying two very interesting things that I had not heard until now. One is that there is an expectation that they will keep doing that on a yearly basis, and that every year or so they should or would approve about another 10 new nuclear reactors. That's massive. And also that Beijing is prepping to export their technology and know-how. This is something that actually the industry has been calling for a couple of years already. And one of the greatest needs that we have in the West is when somebody needs a massive amount of power generation, aka data centers and others, from going to recognizing the need in order to actually get that energy, there is a long process, right? There is a lot of permitting, there is licensing of the designs, it's basically a custom build every time that this needs to be implemented. In China, I think that they must be either getting closer to something more modular or something sped up, or their permitting has been streamlined. Obviously, because everything is government mandated, permitting would be very much streamlined. But the idea here is that China starts exporting the way that they do things in the nuclear sector, which is good in a sense for the industry, but just absolutely sad that the West has not picked up on this and been able to actually come up with real solutions of designs and operations and implementation that allows us to fast track, the build outs of nuclear reactors. Now, China with, their whole nuclear renaissance, that's one story, which obviously puts on a lot of pressure on demand. I think it helps to answer the question, will China sell their stock into the market? By stock, I mean their natural uranium, their mined uranium, their yellow cake into the market and crash the price. It becomes even more unlikely now that they're showing their cards and saying, we are just going to build, 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 build. And we are very hungry for more pounds of uranium, more nuclear fuel, etc. And another piece of news that we can transition to on the demand side is that a little while ago, probably just about a month ago or so, there was this piece of news about Meta kind of walking back their nuclear plans. They wanted to do the usual tech thing now, which is to build your own or get somebody else, obviously, to build your own nuclear reactor, your SMR or whatever it is, to power your AI data centers. Well, it turns out that Meta at the time said, we can't do this because somebody found a very rare type of bee in the region where they were going to implement this plan. Now you gotta love, government bureaucracy and the preservation of rare species. Like I understand to some extent, but at the same time, in order of importance and opportunities for economic gain and jobs, there's an argument to be made that maybe this is why one of the reasons why China gets things done and the West doesn't. And then they have actually come out and rejigged their plans. And they're actually, as well as China, showing their cards as well as to the importance of their nuclear power generation, which is they have an RFP out, and the RFP is very broad. So it doesn't tell potential suppliers where this nuclear power plant needs to be. And it has a lot of requirements regarding, they want somebody to come in, probably a consortium to come in and take care of mostly everything, right? They just want to be able to come in and avail of the energy itself, but they are willing to take on third parties to do everything else. And this tells me something, if you can read between the lines, that if they are willing to pick anywhere, any location, as long as it can be done, then it stands to reason that that is the most important thing in the whole chain, right? They have identified a need, and the hardest puzzle to figure out is the nuclear energy generation. And so for that, they're willing to put everything else under the decision of whatever gets the job done. So wherever we can make this thing happen, that's where we're going to locate our data centers. That is where our personnel is going to be. That's where we're going to go in and invest. That's very big in the demand side, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just basically showcases that they want the power. They don't care where it's located. They just need that as a component to their AI data center. And I think you're seeing that same kind of a message from the rest of the tech sector, where they're willing to restart 3 Mile Island, which would be something that you never thought you would see in the news with Constellation. And you would see some of these AI data centers looking to small modular reactors that haven't even been built yet. And there is a proof of
Exactly.
concept, but they're willing to do anything to get this power. And nuclear is the best way to get carbon free baseload 24/7 power for these big tech companies. So just a lot of domestic drivers here, but also the news from China just goes to highlight that not only are they willing to build, and it's impressive numbers, and we knew these were coming because there's these different stages, Fabi. There's the proposed, then planned, and then built. Well, the
Mm-hmm.
ones that have been proposed and planned are now actually hitting the actual stage where they're being constructed in China, but they're also willing to export that technology. And so you make a great point that really in the West, we've done a terrible job of exporting our technology. But we do have Cameco that has the Westinghouse division that they purchased, where they may start exporting some of the tech here to keep building reactors, because there's a lot of other countries that are looking to deploy some nuclear power, and those commitments from the COP 28 or 29 that said they want to triple nuclear energy by the year 2050. So a lot of big demand drivers. Let's talk supply though. When you look at supply, when you look around the world, what has your attention as far as can we even come close to meeting the deficit that we have right now with the current crop of producers?
So anywhere you look, and you can do a very extensive, thorough research on suppliers coming in 2024, whether they're trying to ramp up or just come into production for the first time. And across the board, you see a very clear theme. Nobody is really hitting their targets from last year. That tells you, a pretty serious picture from the supply side, especially if your book is counting on the fact that the Sprott vehicle is maybe someday going to sell you material, which is very, very unlikely. And if they did, they would signal before they ever did to the whole market, and you'd have plenty of opportunity to sell. It's not looking good. I mean, you look at what used to be the norm in this industry, which is okay, maybe not like the Japanese who keep, 8 years worth of natural uranium to maybe, I don't know, call it four or so. But utilities are looking at, having 2 years or less of inventory right now. And I mean, there's only so much more kicking the can down the road you can do when you're at, a 2 year stock level. There isn't much you can do. And when it really comes to it, even if they did go to the different suppliers available, the chemicals of this world, etc., the fact that uranium is needed right now doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get it when you want it for the price that you're willing to pay for it. So I think that the nuclear fuel bios are going to find themselves in a very difficult situation very, very soon. And probably that's when we're going to see sparks flying because it will spill over into the spot market. There are two things that most people don't talk about when it comes to the supply side, and that is, the Uzbeks are, they're producing fine, they're producing, but they don't have a magical, uranium spitting volcano. They have the issues that everybody else has. They will have production issues. They'll have the issues that professionals in this industry are few and far between. And, Uzbekistan, you have to take a look at where is it going to go to? Are they going to cozy up to China? Are they going to cozy up to Russia, et cetera, et cetera? So there are many different questions regarding Uzbekistan, and are they going to absolutely obliterate the market? And can they produce an amount that will offset the higher demand that we're seeing almost on a monthly basis going up, going into the future? I think the answer is no. And there's also this other thing that nobody talks about, which is there is a lot of small amounts of uranium material in phosphate mining. I guess after they're done with what they want from phosphate, there are these piles of radioactive slurry. I'm sure there's a technical name for it. To me, it's just, mounds of slur. And turns out that you can technically, if the price is high enough for long enough, extract uranium out of these phosphate mines. Well, for us to have a economic level for this to happen, we are probably talking, I don't know, I've heard numbers thrown around 120 to 150 dollar uranium per pound, and that even if it stayed like this, say we woke up tomorrow and that was the price of uranium, it would have to stay like this for a while, and then the phosphate mines would have to get special permission in order to do the extraction, and then that, with building out the facilities, would take a couple of years. There was a facility somewhere in Brazil, the name escapes me right now, that was looking into getting into this uranium extraction activity, and it's just been pushed back, I think, by 3 or 4 years. So there is a lot of uranium, and we always have to watch out, where could this thesis fall? Where could this derail completely, where the need for mined uranium isn't what we think it would be, but it's very hard to crack. It's very hard to crack, and the miners just aren't able to ramp up. They just haven't been able to, and it doesn't look so far like there is enough technology out there at scale in order for us to be able to say, okay, maybe the bear thesis stands here. And then maybe we should touch upon very quickly the tech sector of the nuclear cycle. What do you think, Shad?
Well, I do want to respond to something you just said about the phosphates. I mean, it's fine that people can point to that as a supply side, but as you mentioned, everything always takes longer with permitting, especially with radioactive materials. And if they've never had a history of doing that before, there's maybe other companies in the sector that could process it I'm thinking of things like how Energy Fuels has been processing rare earths because they're one of the few companies that had a radioactive license. Those are not easy to get, and it's not something that's going to be a supply response, like you say, for years. And so even if they can do it, even if uranium prices were at $150, they still couldn't bring on the supply, and neither could most producers. So I'd love to just ask you about U.S. producers. I know you like to look at that. They're the only ones that I can see that are actually bringing new production online, other than Kazakhstan, which has said that the Kazatomprom that they're going to give more of their uranium fuels to China versus Cameco. They're going to shortchange Cameco's JV by 18% this year. And Uzbekistan, it's unknown where their allegiance is, but it doesn't look like a lot of it's flowing to the West. The only companies I see are the handful of U.S. producers, the Energy Fuels, the Ur-Energies, Peninsula, Encore, UEC, and even Cameco has ISR operations in the U.S. they could switch on. Those are the only places of supply I see coming online. Is there anything we're missing here?
Yeah, the US has been a massive surprise to me. Luckily, I've been invested in the US uranium as a theme in one way or another for several years. And it just goes to show the state of this industry that the US, with all its permitting issues, has been the one country that has been actually decent at putting projects into production. It just goes to show, we were briefly talking about the phosphate piles. You have a lot of phosphate piles in Brazil, but the nuclear permitting, well, you could call it the whole cycle in Brazil is government controlled. So it takes a while for anything to get done there. And the other major location for the phosphate pile would be Morocco. Now, I don't know what Moroccans would do with it quickly. I'm not sure they could ship it to somewhere else quickly, but it's just not looking very likely right now. It's not like Morocco has a very, active and nuclear fuel cycle as a whole. It's not, like super strong for them to just plug it in and be able to do that extraction. So, yeah, I mean, the US coming in as the country that has green lighted most of the new supply that we see, but lucky for us, it is in very small supply. So, a great bet to do, in my opinion, is to look at developers and producers in the States. I think it's going to continue to be, re-rated, and it's just an amazing theme. It just keeps delivering.
Well, there's one other thing I wanted to get to here, Fabi, and that is explorers in the uranium sector, mostly in the Athabasca Basin, but also the Thelon Basin, also in the US, also in Australia. It doesn't seem like all the money raised over the last 2 years, and there was a lot of money raised and a lot of new companies launched, has really yielded a lot of new discoveries. What do you make of the exploration side of the business?
So exploration is extremely expensive, especially in the Athabasca Basin. And people don't really understand that when, let's make a comparison here. If you're exploring for gold, it's not completely out of this world that you have a decent hit, a decent intercept in your first campaign. It's not fully necessary for a project, to work out, but it can happen. And if you know the geology quite well, and it's an area that's fairly well understood by the geos, then that can be done. There's, a lot of places where you have outcrop and you have better understood mineralized systems. With uranium specifically, it just turns out that the place where you can get the highest grade and therefore the highest bang for buck when you do find something is the Athabasca Basin, where because of the extremely high grade, the footprint of those deposits is extremely small. And it's very, very easy to miss. And so everything needs to be really, really, really accurate. All your geophysics need to be on point. You need to have the latest technology. You need to have the best geos, and you need to have a really strong thesis. So the more information, the more data you have, the better. And you could still miss. And it doesn't even mean that the uranium isn't there. It just might be I don't know, 20 meters over to the side, and you might have missed a deposit. So that means that there is a lot of money that gets put into the Athabasca Basin every year. And it is not at all common, at least I don't think I've ever seen it, for a company to come out and from geophysics jump into a drilling campaign and actually find high grade uranium. It's virtually unheard of. You take a look at all of the deposits in the Athabasca Basin. You pretty much pick any one of them, and they have taken quite a few years to figure out and to develop fully. And I think that people's expectations have been off. That's for one, but also I'm not sure that the companies going in there all have the right type of geophysics. And I'm no geologist, so I couldn't tell you like what is better, but it seems to me that the best people keep hitting over and over again. And so the companies as a whole, just like the junior mining sector, they don't make great discoveries, but the right people do. And so this is a case in point. There's a company that is actually a former sponsor of my show, Stallion Uranium. They had really experienced people on board the whole way through. And on their first drilling campaign, they didn't hit massive amounts of uranium. It wasn't high grade or anything like that, but there was a whiff. And a whiff on your first try is actually good for the Athabasca Basin. And I don't think people got it. And so they sold the stock off. But it turns out that if you get a whiff on your first drilling campaign compared to everything else, it's really good. Likewise, people are not really getting, I think, what's happening in the Thelon Basin with Forum Energy. They are, and disclaimer here, they're currently sponsoring my channel, and they're getting really good grades, and they're continuing to get really good grades. But people need to understand that, yes, it takes several $1 million and several years worth of really hard work for them to be able to maybe hit something that's really amazing. F3 uranium, for instance, took, I think, from 2014 to 2022, I think, in order to make their massive, massive hit and become, $100 million plus market cap. So yeah, I think people need to understand what it takes and how many seasons it takes in order to find something of true value. But also, when you take the whole group of companies as a whole, yeah, it's a lot of money for very, very little being discovered at this point. So I don't know, maybe this is where technology breakthroughs need to come in and change the game. I've been having some secret conversations on the side with some very smart people that are telling me that yes, this is possible. It is possible to increase your chances by a lot when it comes to finding the right stuff in the Athabasca Basin. But it still takes a lot of money. It really does. So we'll see how this pans out, and maybe this next season will be better for results. But I mean F3 just had amazing results. Their previous sponsor as well. I'm involved in all these all these companies one way or another. So yeah, they just had a really really juicy hit, but the whiff came in 2014. So I think people need to dial in their expectations. The Athabasca, it will treat you very well if you give it enough time and if you have the right people on board. Otherwise, it's really just a losing game.
Well, I think we'll wrap it up there, Fabi, but I think that's a great point. There is a long time between the whiff and the hit. A lot of times there's a lot of smoke before you see the fire, and we're talking years here of the drill campaigns. So it's not like a gold company that pokes a hole in the ground and says, we found a bunch of gold, and it's a huge system, or a copper system where they can drill a couple holes and say, hey, this is a huge system. These are very discrete mineralized areas for uranium. And so it does take a while to vector in on where that is. I'd love to hear more about this new tech that you're having secret conversations about in a future episode. So we'll follow up with you on that to see how companies can better target these high grade, small discrete packages of uranium in the Athabasca Basin or the Thelon Basin. But I appreciate you coming on the KE report and talking macro, talking demand side for the nuclear power sector, talking the supply side from uranium, and looking at the producers and the explorers and developers. So For those that are following along, if you'd like to follow Fabi's thoughts, definitely click on the link below this interview. It takes you over to the Next Big Rush website as well as her YouTube page. And it's always great having you on the show, Fabi. Looking forward, as always, to our next conversation.
Thank you very much, Shad. Looking forward to it.